The lights in Epsilon 7 mining station flickered twice before dying completely. Taeyang Kim froze in the middle of the storage bay, his hand still reaching for a crate of protein rations. Darkness swallowed everything. Then the emergency lights kicked in, casting everything in a sick red glow. He heard shouting from the main corridor. Not unusual. 3 different species working in close quarters always meant tension. Humans, Vex traders, and court laborers rarely agreed on anything, but this shouting sounded different. Angrier, more desperate. Taeyang grabbed his supply pad and headed toward the noise. His job as a supply officer usually kept him away from trouble. He counted boxes, tracked inventory, and made sure everyone got their rations on time. Boring work, but safe. He preferred boring. The corridor opened into the common area. About 30 workers had gathered there, and the situation looked bad. A court laborer, probably 8 feet tall and built like a boulder, had a Vex trader pinned against the wall. The Vex was making a high-pitched screaming sound. 2 other courts were blocking the human workers from interfering. Taeyang stayed back. He was not a fighter. He was just a corporal who pushed papers and moved boxes. But then he saw her. Commander Heejin Park stood near the entrance, speaking urgently into her communicator. Her face was tight with worry. Before anyone could react, a new shape entered the common area. Everyone went silent. Even the court holding the Vex loosened his grip. Wrath had arrived. The Krell warrior stood 7 feet tall, his reptilian frame covered in dark green scales that looked like natural armor. His eyes were yellow with vertical slits, designed for hunting in any light. He moved with a predator's grace, each step deliberate and controlled. Every species in the galaxy knew about the Krell. They were apex predators, undefeated in combat, feared everywhere they went. Wrath had been assigned to Epsilon 7 2 months ago as security enforcement. In that time, he had spoken to no one. He ate alone, worked alone, and radiated an aura of violence that made everyone give him a wide space. The court holding the Vex was too angry or too stupid to recognize the danger. He snarled something in his language and shook the Vex hard. Wrath moved. One moment he was 10 feet away. The next moment his clawed hand was around the court's throat. The court released the Vex and tried to fight back. Useless. Wrath lifted the 8-foot alien off the ground with one arm. The other 2 courts rushed forward to help their friend. Wrath threw the first one into the wall with enough force that Taeyang heard bones crack. The second court swung a massive fist at Wrath's head. The Krell warrior caught the fist, twisted, and there was a wet snapping sound. The court screamed. The first court, the one who had grabbed the Vex, was turning purple. He clawed at Wrath's arm, leaving scratches that would have torn through human skin. Wrath's scales did not even mark. The Krell's face showed no emotion. No anger, no excitement, just cold, predatory efficiency. Commander Park shouted something. Taeyang could not hear it over the court's choking sounds. Wrath finally released his grip. The court collapsed to the floor, gasping for air. He would live, but barely. The Krell warrior looked around the room slowly, his yellow eyes touching each person. When his gaze passed over Taeyang, the human felt ice run through his veins. Those eyes held no mercy, no understanding, no connection. Just the eternal hunger of a predator evaluating prey. Wrath spoke then. His voice was deep, rough, like gravel grinding together. Next fight, I kill. He turned and walked away, his tail dragging slightly behind him. Nobody moved for a long moment. Then the room exploded into activity. Medical teams rushed in for the injured courts. Workers scattered, heading back to their quarters. Commander Park began shouting orders, trying to restore calm. Taeyang slipped away quietly. He had seen enough violence for one day. Back in his quarters, he tried to relax but could not stop thinking about Wrath's eyes. The Krell operated on pure instinct. There was no reasoning with something like that. No common ground. You either dominated or were dominated. That was the Krell way. His quarters were small but private. One of the few benefits of his boring supply job. He had a bunk, a small desk, a storage locker, and most importantly, a cooking unit he had modified himself. Technically against regulations, but Commander Park looked the other way. Taeyang opened his personal storage locker. Inside, wrapped carefully in thermal cloth, were his treasures from Earth. Real gochujang paste, sealed and preserved. Dried garlic, rice wine, sesame oil, a small container of salt mixed with Korean chili flakes. Things he had carefully rationed over 3 years of station duty. Tonight he needed comfort food. Needed to remember home. Needed to forget those yellow predator eyes. He pulled out a portion of station protein. The stuff was technically meat grown in vats, nutritionally complete but tasteless. Most workers just ate it plain and tried not to think about it. But Taiyang had learned years ago that with the right preparation, even station protein could taste like something from Earth. He sliced the protein into strips, then made a marinade. Gochujang, garlic, a little sugar, sesame oil, and rice wine. He worked slowly, measuring carefully. His grandmother had taught him this recipe when he was 8 years old. She had told him that food was not just about eating. It was about memory, love, and home. The protein strips went into the marinade. He sealed the container and let it sit while he prepared his small grill. Another modification that was definitely against regulations. But out here on the edge of known space, small comforts kept you sane. 30 minutes later, he placed the marinated strips on the grill. The smell hit him immediately. Sweet, spicy, savory with that fermented depth from the gochujang. His mouth watered. For a moment, he was not in a cramped station at the edge of nowhere. He was back in his grandmother's kitchen in Busan, watching her cook, learning the rhythms of home. The ventilation system carried the smell through his quarters and presumably into the corridor beyond. Taeyang did not care. Let them smell it. Let them wonder what the quiet supply officer was cooking. For these few minutes, he was not Corporal Kim. He was just Taeyang, making food the way his family had taught him. He plated the meat carefully, added a small portion of station vegetables that he had pickled himself in a makeshift kimchi style, and sat down to eat. The first bite was heaven. Not quite grandmother's cooking, but close enough to ease the ache in his chest. He was halfway through his meal when he heard the footsteps in the corridor outside. Heavy footsteps. Clawed feet scraping on metal. The footsteps stopped outside his door. Taeyang's chopsticks froze halfway to his mouth. His heart hammered in his chest. There was only one being on this station with footsteps that heavy. The door chimed. The visitor was requesting entry. Taeyang swallowed hard. He put down his chopsticks and stood up slowly. His hands were shaking slightly. Every instinct screamed at him not to open that door. Nothing good could come from a Krell warrior showing up at your quarters after dark. But Corporal Kim had been raised to be polite, to respect visitors. His grandmother would be ashamed if he turned someone away without at least opening the door. He took a deep breath and pressed the door release. Wrath stood in the corridor, his massive frame filling the doorway. His yellow eyes locked onto Taeyang immediately. The human felt like a rabbit staring at a wolf. Then Wrath's nostrils flared. His head tilted slightly. Those predator eyes shifted from Taeyang to the plate of food still sitting on the small table. His tongue flicked out, tasting the air. Neither of them moved. The moment stretched thin as wire. Finally, Wrath spoke, his voice that same grinding rumble. "What is that smell?" Taeyang's mind raced. How did you explain home cooking to a predator? How did you explain grandmother's recipes to something that probably ate its food raw? He did the only thing that made sense. The thing his grandmother would have done. "Would you like to try some?" Taeyang asked. Wrath stared at the human for a long moment. His yellow eyes showed no emotion, but something in his posture had changed. He was not aggressive, not yet. But the tension in the small quarters was thick enough to touch. Taeyang kept his hands visible and his breathing steady. Showing fear to a predator was the worst thing you could do. His grandfather had taught him that during their camping trips in the mountains. Same principle applied here, just with a 7-foot alien instead of a wild animal. The Krell warrior took one step into the room. The door slid shut behind him automatically. Taeyang's quarters suddenly felt much smaller. Wrath looked around slowly, his gaze taking in everything. The modified cooking unit, the small grill still warm on the table. The plate of grilled meat with its dark glistening sauce. "You invite me to eat?" Wrath's voice held something that might have been confusion. "You are prey species. I could break you." Taeyang nodded slowly. "Yes, you could. But you came to my door because of the smell. And I learned a long time ago that when someone is curious about your food, you share it." He gestured to the small table. "Please sit." There was no chair that would support a Krell's weight. Wrath solved this by simply sitting on the floor, his legs crossed in a position that looked uncomfortable but probably was not. Even sitting, his head was level with Taeyang's chest. The human picked up his plate and sat down across from the Krell. He used his chopsticks to pick up a piece of the marinated meat and held it out. Wrath stared at it. "It is cooked protein," Taeyang explained, "from the station supplies. But I prepared it in a traditional way from my homeworld. We marinated in a sauce made from fermented peppers, garlic, and other ingredients. Then we grill it. Vrath reached out slowly. His claws could have easily sliced through Taeyang's hand, but he was careful. He took the meat between two claws and lifted it to his mouth. His forked tongue flicked out first, tasting. Then he placed it in his mouth and chewed slowly. Taeyang watched the Krell's face. Vrath's eyes widened slightly. His jaw stopped moving. For several heartbeats, he simply held the food in his mouth, not swallowing. Then he swallowed. His eyes closed briefly. When they opened again, something had changed in them. The predatory coldness had been replaced by something Taeyang had not expected to see on a Krell's face. Wonder. What is this? Vrath's voice was quieter now, almost uncertain. Bulgogi, Taeyang said. Or my version of it anyway. Real bulgogi uses specific cuts of beef from Earth, and the marinade should age longer. But out here you work with what you have. This is not food, Vrath said slowly. Food is fuel. Protein, nutrition. This is something else. Taeyang smiled despite his nervousness. Yes, this is cooking. We prepare food not just to eat, but to enjoy, to remember, to share with others. He held out another piece with his chopsticks. Vrath took it immediately, this time less cautious. He chewed slowly, deliberately, as if trying to understand each flavor. My people do not do this. We hunt, we kill, we eat. Food is simple. Nothing wrong with simple, Taeyang said. He took a piece for himself, savoring the sweet and spicy flavors. But humans discovered long ago that food could be more than fuel. It could be art, memory, love. Vrath tilted his head, a gesture that reminded Taeyang of a curious dog. You love this meat? Not exactly. Taeyang set down his chopsticks and thought about how to explain. My grandmother taught me this recipe. She learned it from her mother, who learned it from her mother. When I cook this food, I remember my grandmother's kitchen, the way she smiled when the food was ready, the stories she told while we cooked together. So in a way, yes, this food carries love in it. Vrath was silent for a long time. He stared at the remaining pieces on the plate. Krell do not have grandmothers. We have breeding centers, egg chambers. When we hatch, we are raised in training groups. We learn to fight, to hunt, to dominate. There are no kitchens, no smiles, no stories. Something in the way he said it made Taeyang's chest ache. He had spent 3 years on this station feeling lonely, missing home. But at least he had memories of home. What did a Krell have? Violence and hierarchy and the cold efficiency of a warrior culture. Would you like more? Taeyang asked quietly. Vrath nodded. For the next 20 minutes they sat together in silence while Vrath ate the remaining bulgogi. The Krell warrior ate slowly, carefully, as if each piece was something precious. When the plate was empty, he sat back and looked at his claws. I have killed 17 beings in combat, Vrath said suddenly. 3 this cycle alone. I am efficient, feared. I am what a Krell should be. He looked up at Taeyang. But I have never experienced anything like this food. Never knew such things existed. Taeyang thought carefully before responding. Maybe being a perfect warrior is not the same as being complete. Vrath's eyes narrowed. For a moment, Taeyang worried he had gone too far. Insulting a Krell's warrior culture was a good way to get killed. But Vrath did not attack. Instead, he stood up slowly, unfolding to his full 7-foot height. You are strange, human, weak by Krell standards. Yet you possess something we do not. He moved toward the door, then paused. I will return tomorrow. You will teach me more about this cooking. It was not a request, but it was not exactly a threat either. Something in between. Okay, Taeyang said. Tomorrow. Vrath left without another word. The door slid shut behind him, and Taeyang released a breath he had not realized he was holding. His hands were shaking. He looked at the empty plate and wondered what he had just started. The next evening, Vrath returned at the same time. He entered without knocking this time, as if he had decided this was now an acceptable routine. Taeyang had prepared more bulgogi, along with a small portion of his precious kimchi and some steamed rice. Sit, Taeyang said, and Vrath did, taking his position on the floor. This time, Taeyang explained each component of the meal as he served it. The rice was a staple grain from Earth, plain but essential. The kimchi was fermented vegetables, sour and spicy, meant to complement the richness of the meat. The bulgogi they had shared before. Vrath tried each item carefully. He did not like the kimchi at first, his face contorting at the sour flavor. But after the third bite, something clicked. This cleanses the taste, he observed. Prepares the mouth for the next bite of meat. Exactly, Taeyang said, impressed. You understand palate balance. I understand efficient consumption, Vrath corrected. But there was something in his tone that suggested he understood it was more than that. As they ate, Vrath began to ask questions. Simple ones at first. How was the gochujang made? How long did kimchi ferment? What other dishes existed on Earth? Taeyang answered each question, and with each answer the conversation grew easier. Eventually, Vrath began to share small details about Krell life. Their hunts were sacred. Young Krell proved themselves by taking down dangerous prey alone. Eating the kill was purely functional. No seasoning, no preparation. Just raw meat consumed quickly to restore energy. Do you eat with others? Taeyang asked. Your family? Friends? Vrath shook his head. Krell eat alone. Sharing a kill shows weakness. Suggests you cannot provide for yourself. But you are here, Taeyang pointed out gently. Eating with me. Vrath was quiet for a moment. Yes, I am here, and I do not understand why this feels correct when my training says it is wrong. They continued eating in comfortable silence. When the meal was finished, Vrath stood to leave but paused at the door again. Tomorrow, he said. It was becoming their routine. Tomorrow, Taeyang agreed. On the third evening, Taeyang taught Vrath how to use chopsticks. The Krell warrior's claws made it difficult, but he approached the challenge with the same focus he probably applied to combat training. After 20 minutes of practice, he managed to pick up a single grain of rice. On the fourth evening, Vrath brought something with him. A strange crystalline container filled with a luminescent liquid. Krell drink, he explained. For after hunts. It restores minerals. He poured some for Taeyang. It tasted like liquid metal mixed with battery acid. Taeyang managed not to spit it out, but barely. Vrath's face did something that might have been a smile. Your kimchi face, Vrath said. Now I understand. On the seventh evening, Taeyang prepared a new dish. Spicy pork stew with vegetables. The smell filled his quarters long before Vrath arrived. When the Krell entered, he stopped in the doorway and simply breathed in the aroma for a long moment. This one is different, Vrath observed as he sat. This is comfort food, Taeyang explained. For when you are sad or tired or lonely, it warms you from inside. Vrath tasted the stew carefully. Taeyang watched as the Krell's eyes closed and his massive shoulders relaxed in a way they never did on duty. When Vrath opened his eyes again, they looked distant. Warmth from inside, Vrath repeated quietly. Yes, I understand now. For the first time since arriving at Epsilon 7, Taeyang did not feel quite so alone. Word spread through Epsilon 7 like fire through dry grass. The quiet human supply officer and the terrifying Krell warrior were meeting every evening. Workers whispered in corridors. Theories multiplied. Most assumed Taeyang was being threatened or manipulated. A few suggested blackmail. Nobody believed the truth would be something as simple as sharing dinner. Commander Heejin Park heard the rumors on the third day. By the fifth day, she had reviewed security footage showing Vrath entering and leaving Taeyang's quarters peacefully each evening. On the seventh day, she decided to investigate personally. Taeyang was in the storage bay running inventory on protein rations when Commander Park found him. She dismissed the other workers with a gesture and waited until they were alone. Corporal Kim, she said, her voice neutral but her eyes concerned. We need to talk about your evening visitor. Taeyang had been expecting this conversation. He put down his datapad and faced her directly. Yes, Commander. Is Vrath threatening you? Park asked bluntly. Because if he is, we can take measures. I will not have my personnel intimidated, not even by a Krell. No threats, Commander, Taeyang said honestly. He comes to eat. I have been teaching him about Earth food preparation. Park stared at him for a long moment. You have been teaching a Krell warrior to cook? Not exactly cooking. More like appreciating cooked food. Understanding why humans prepare meals the way we do. Taeyang knew how strange it sounded. It started by accident. He smelled what I was cooking and became curious. Curious, Park repeated slowly. She seemed to be processing this information carefully. Corporal, do you understand what Krell are? They are apex predators. Warrior culture to the core. They do not become curious about food. They consume it and move on. I know, Commander. But Vrath is different. Or maybe he is not different, and we just never gave any Krell the chance to be anything other than what we expected. Taeyang chose his words carefully. He comes every evening. We share a meal, we talk. He is learning that food can be more than fuel. Park was silent for a moment, thinking. Finally, she sighed. The station is on edge, Corporal. People are frightened. They see a Krell entering your quarters and imagine the worst. Can you blame them after what happened in the common area? No, Commander. I understand. But Vrath has not hurt anyone since that incident. He has been calmer, more controlled. Taeyang paused. Maybe sharing meals is helping him too. Park studied his face, looking for any sign of deception or delusion. She must have found neither because her expression softened slightly. This is highly irregular. But I will admit, there have been no further violent incidents since Vrath started his visits. If this strange arrangement keeps the peace, I will allow it to continue. She fixed him with a stern look. But I will be monitoring the situation closely. Any sign of trouble, any indication that you are in danger, and I pull the plug immediately. Understood? Understood, Commander. Thank you. Park turned to leave, then paused. Corporal, what are you feeding him tonight?
Taeyang smiled slightly.
Beef stew with vegetables. My mother's recipe. Park shook her head, looking bemused. Dismissed, Corporal. And be careful. That evening, Vrath arrived earlier than usual. He seemed agitated, his tail lashing slightly behind him. Taeyang was stirring the stew when the Krell entered. Something wrong? Taeyang asked. Vrath paced the small quarters like a caged animal. Transmission from Krell Command. A superior officer arrives tomorrow. High Commander Thresh. He comes to inspect station security. Taeyang felt his stomach drop. And that is bad because? Thresh is old warrior, traditional. He believes in Krell purity. Strength through domination. Vrath stopped pacing and looked at Taeyang directly. He will see that I have changed. He will see weakness. Changed how? Vrath gestured around the quarters. These meals. These conversations. I spend time with a prey species. I seek your company. I enjoy food beyond its function. By Krell standards, I am compromised. Taeyang set down his spoon carefully. What will Thresh do? He will test me, challenge my loyalty. If I fail his standards, he will order me to prove my dedication to Krell values. Vrath's voice was flat, but his eyes showed something that might have been conflict. He will order me to kill you. The words hung in the air between them. Taeyang forced himself to breathe normally. And will you? Vrath did not answer immediately. He looked at his claws, then at the pot of stew still simmering on the cooking unit. Before these meals, the answer would be simple. Orders are absolute. But now I do not know. You have shown me something my people deny exists. You have given me warmth from inside. He looked up. I do not wish to kill you, human. My name is Taeyang, the human said quietly. If we are going to die over this, you should at least use my name. Something shifted in Vrath's expression. Taeyang, he repeated carefully as if tasting the word. I am called Vrath, not just warrior. Not just Krell, Vrath. They stood in silence for a moment. Then Taeyang made a decision. Vrath, when does Thresh arrive? Tomorrow, midday cycle. Then tonight we eat the stew. And tomorrow I will invite Thresh to dinner. Vrath's eyes widened. You cannot. He will kill you immediately. Maybe, Taeyang acknowledged. Or maybe he will be curious like you were. Maybe he will smell the food and want to know what it is. Maybe I can teach him what I taught you. You do not understand. Thresh is not curious. He is pure Krell, hardened by 1,000 battles. He believes connection is weakness, that sentiment is disease. He will not accept your food. Then we have nothing to lose by trying. Taeyang ladled stew into 2 bowls. But if I am going to try this insane plan, I need your help. I need to understand Krell culture better. What matters to Thresh? What does he value beyond violence? Vrath sat heavily on the floor, accepting his bowl. Krell value strength, efficiency, honor in combat. But also, he paused, thinking, also tradition. The old ways. The warrior codes passed down through generations. So Thresh respects tradition? Above all things. Taeyang sat across from Vrath, an idea forming. Then I will not present the meal as something new. I will present it as human tradition. As ancient warrior culture from Earth, I will frame it as a challenge between traditions, not a weakness. Vrath considered this while eating his stew. It might work. If you present strength in your own way, Thresh might listen before he kills. But Taeyang, you must understand, even if he listens, even if he tries the food, it may not be enough. Thresh has spent 300 cycles as a warrior. His mind is fixed. 300 cycles? Taeyang blinked. How old are you? 45 cycles. young by Krell standards, which is why I might still change. Why your food could reach me. Thresh is ancient, set in his ways. They ate in heavy silence. The stew was rich and savory, filled with vegetables and tender meat that had simmered for hours. Taeyang had made it perfectly, but the taste was bitter in his mouth now. This might be their last meal together. When the bowls were empty, Vrath did not leave immediately as usual. He sat in the small quarters looking at the cooking unit, the small grill, the containers of spices and ingredients that Taeyang had carefully preserved and rationed. "Why do you do this?" Vrath asked suddenly. "The cooking. The sharing. You could eat the station rations like everyone else, simple, efficient. But you spend time and resources preparing elaborate meals. Why?" Taeyang thought about his grandmother's kitchen, his mother's patient teaching, family dinners around a worn table, sharing food and stories and laughter. How could he explain all of that to a being raised in an egg chamber, trained only for war? "Because it makes me human," he said finally. "Anyone can consume nutrients. Animals do that. But humans cook. We prepare, we share. We turn simple ingredients into something meaningful. When I cook, I am connected to every generation of my family that cooked before me. I am connected to my culture, my home, myself." He looked at Vrath. "And now I am connected to you." Vrath's eyes closed briefly. When they opened, they held a sadness that Taeyang had never seen in a Krell before. "My people have no connections. We have hierarchy, chain of command, but not bonds. Not the warmth you speak of. We are strong, but we are alone. Always alone." "You are not alone right now," Taeyang said softly. They sat together in silence until Vrath finally stood to leave. At the door, the Krell warrior paused and looked back. "Tomorrow when Thresh arrives, do not approach him immediately. Let me speak to him first. Try to prepare him. It is not much, but it might help." "Thank you, Vrath." The Krell nodded once and left. Taeyang cleaned up the bowls and put away his cooking supplies. Then he sat on his bunk and began planning the most important meal of his life. He had one chance to convince a 300-cycle-old warrior that connection was not weakness. One chance to save both himself and the unlikely friendship he had built with Vrath. He would need more than bulgogi for this. He would need to prepare a feast worthy of a Krell High Commander, something that would challenge every assumption Thresh held about food, about humans, about strength itself. Taeyang pulled out his datapad and began making lists. Ingredients he would need. Preparations that would take hours. Traditional dishes that told the story of human resilience and culture. If he was going to bet his life on a meal, it would be the best meal he had ever cooked. Outside his window, the station lights flickered in the eternal darkness of space. Tomorrow would bring either death or something new. Either way, Taeyang would face it with the weapons his grandmother had given him. Recipes passed down through generations. The simple magic of turning raw ingredients into something that nourished not just the body, but the soul. He worked through the night preparing. High Commander Thresh arrived at Epsilon 7 precisely at midday cycle. His transport ship was 3 times the size of a standard vessel, and it carried markings that made even the Vex traders nervous. When Thresh emerged from the docking bay, every worker in the corridor found somewhere else to be. He was larger than Vrath, older, with scales that had darkened to almost black with age. Scars covered his arms and chest, each one a story of survival. His eyes were paler than Vrath's, almost white, and they missed nothing. He moved with absolute confidence, the kind that came from 3 centuries of never losing. Commander Park met him in the main corridor with full diplomatic protocol. Taeyang watched from a distance, hidden behind a stack of supply crates. He could not hear their conversation, but he saw Park gesture toward the common area, probably explaining station operations. Vrath stood 3 steps behind Thresh, his posture rigid and formal. Nothing like the relaxed warrior who had sat on Taeyang's floor sharing stew. Thresh spoke briefly to Vrath. Even from a distance, Taeyang could see the younger Krell stiffen further. Whatever was said, it was not pleasant. Then Thresh dismissed Vrath with a gesture and continued his inspection with Commander Park. Taeyang waited 2 hours before approaching Vrath. He found the younger Krell in the security office, reviewing patrol schedules with mechanical focus. "Vrath," Taeyang said quietly from the doorway. The Krell's head snapped up. For a moment his eyes held a warning. Not now, they said, but Taeyang needed to know. Did you speak to him about the dinner invitation? Vrath glanced at the empty corridor before responding in a low voice. I tried. He knows about our meetings. He has already decided you are a corrupting influence. He says I have gone soft, that I spend time with prey when I should be maintaining dominance. So he will not come to dinner. He did not say no, Vrath replied carefully. I framed it as you suggested. A challenge between traditions. Human warrior culture versus Krell warrior culture, demonstrated through food preparation. He found the idea amusing. Amusing is good, Taeyang said, trying to sound confident. Amusing means curious. Taeyang, Vrath's voice was tight. He called it your last meal. He said he would attend to witness human foolishness before issuing final orders regarding my conduct. He expects to be entertained before he orders your execution. Taeyang felt his throat go dry but forced himself to nod. What time? Evening cycle. 6th hour. Vrath leaned forward. You should run. Take a transport pod. Disappear into the outer colonies. I will tell Thresh you escaped. And then he orders you to hunt me down as punishment for letting me escape, Taeyang said. No, this is the only way forward. Either Thresh understands what I am trying to show him or he does not. Running just delays the inevitable. Vrath's claws scraped against the desk surface. You are brave for a human. Foolish but brave. I learned from a very stubborn Krell, Taeyang said with a slight smile. See you at 6th hour. He spent the afternoon preparing the most important meal of his life. He had requisitioned extra protein rations, traded favors for fresh vegetables from the hydroponics bay, and used nearly all his remaining earth spices. This would empty his supplies, but if he failed tonight, he would not need them anyway. The menu was carefully planned. Bulgogi as the opening, since it was what had first caught Vrath's attention. Kimchi jjigae, the spicy stew that had taught Vrath about comfort and warmth. Galbi, short ribs marinated for hours and grilled until the meat fell off the bone. Rice, perfectly steamed. And several types of banchan, small side dishes that represented the completeness of Korean dining. Each dish told a story. The bulgogi represented first contact, the moment curiosity overcame fear. The stew represented comfort and connection. The galbi represented patience and care, as it required hours of preparation. The banchan represented the idea that a meal was not one thing but many things working together in harmony. As he worked, Taeyang thought about his grandmother. She had survived wars, poverty, and loss. She had fled her home with nothing and built a new life in a foreign land. She had endured because she carried her culture with her in the form of recipes, traditions, and the simple act of cooking for the people she loved. If you could survive all that, grandmother, Taeyang whispered to the empty quarters, then I can survive one dinner with a stubborn Krell. At 6th hour precisely, there was a knock on his door. Taeyang took a deep breath, smoothed his uniform, and opened it. Thresh stood in the corridor with Vrath slightly behind him. The High Commander's pale eyes swept the small quarters, taking in every detail. The cooking unit, the grill, the carefully arranged dishes on the small table, the steam rising from the hot pot of stew. So this is where you corrupt my warrior, Thresh said. His voice was deeper than Vrath's, rougher, like rocks grinding in an avalanche. This is where I cook, Commander, Taeyang replied as calmly as he could manage. And where I share meals with a friend. Friend, Thresh repeated the word as if it tasted bad. Krell do not have friends. We have superiors and subordinates, allies and enemies. Friend is a weakness term. Then perhaps I am using the wrong word, Taeyang said. He gestured to the floor where cushions he had borrowed were arranged. Please sit. Let me show you what I mean through food instead of words. Thresh stared at him for a long moment. Taeyang forced himself to meet those pale predator eyes without flinching. Finally, the High Commander moved into the quarters. He did not sit immediately, instead circling the space like a predator checking for threats. Vrath entered last and closed the door. He sat in his usual spot without being asked. Thresh noticed this and his eyes narrowed, but he said nothing. Eventually, he sat as well, his movements controlled and deliberate. Taeyang served the bulgogi first, placing portions before each Krell. This is the first dish I shared with Vrath. It is meat prepared in a traditional style from my homeworld. The marinade takes time to prepare. The grilling requires attention and care. It is not efficient, but it is meaningful. Thresh picked up a piece with his claws and examined it closely. You waste time making food decorative. Meat is meat. This proves human weakness, does it? Taeyang picked up his own chopsticks and took a bite. My ancestors survived ice ages, plagues, and wars. They crossed oceans in wooden ships. They built civilizations from nothing, and through all of that they continued to cook, to prepare meals with care. Was that weakness, or was it strength of a different kind? Thresh placed the meat in his mouth. Taeyang watched his face carefully. The High Commander chewed slowly, his expression unchanging. But his eyes closed briefly, and Taeyang recognized that unconscious response. Vrath had done the same thing on his first taste. Interesting texture, Thresh said neutrally. The flavors are complex. Unnecessary but complex. Taeyang served the next course, the kimchi jjigae still bubbling in its pot. This is a dish we make for comfort. When we are cold, tired, or lonely, it requires fermented vegetables, which take weeks to prepare properly. Again, inefficient, but the warmth it provides is more than physical. Thresh tried the stew. This time his eyes stayed open, but Taeyang saw his shoulders relax slightly. The High Commander looked at Vrath. You have been eating these preparations? Every evening? Yes, High Commander, Vrath replied formally. And you believe this makes you stronger? Vrath hesitated. Taeyang could see him struggling with how to answer. Finally he spoke. I believe it makes me more complete. I'm still a warrior. Still Krell. But now I understand there are experiences beyond combat, pleasures beyond victory, connections beyond hierarchy. Dangerous thinking, Thresh said, but his voice lacked conviction. He took another spoonful of stew. Taeyang served the galbi next, the short ribs tender and glistening with caramelized marinade. This dish takes the longest to prepare. The meat must marinate for hours. The grilling must be watched carefully. One mistake and it burns. It requires patience, attention, and care. By Krell standards, this might seem like wasted effort. He placed the perfectly grilled ribs before Thresh. But my people learned that things worth having often require time and patience. That strength is not always about speed or efficiency. Sometimes strength is the discipline to do things properly, even when the quick way is available. Thresh picked up one rib. He bit into it and meat fell away from the bone effortlessly. He chewed slowly, and for the first time his expression changed. Not quite pleasure. Not quite surprise. Something in between. The meat is very tender, Thresh observed. Because it was prepared with care, Taeyang said. Given time to absorb the flavors. Cooked at the right temperature for the right duration. You cannot rush perfection. They ate in silence for several minutes. Taeyang served the rice and banchan, explaining each side dish. The seasoned spinach. The fermented soybean paste. The pickled radish. Each one a small piece of a larger tradition. Thresh tried each one methodically. He said nothing, but Taeyang noticed he kept eating. If the food was truly pointless, a warrior like Thresh would have stopped after one bite. But he continued, working through each dish with focused attention. Finally, Thresh set down his utensils and looked directly at Taeyang. You are correct that this is not simple fuel. You are correct that it requires skill and patience to create. But what is the point? Why waste resources on elaborate preparation when simple consumption achieves the same nutritional result? Taeyang had been waiting for this question. Because we are more than our efficiency, Commander. Krell are the greatest warriors in the galaxy, undefeated in combat, masters of strength and tactics. But is that all you are? Just warriors? Just weapons? Thresh's eyes narrowed dangerously. You insult Krell culture. No, Taeyang said firmly. I am asking if Krell culture is complete. You have strength. You have honor. You have discipline. But do you have connection, joy? The simple pleasure of sharing something meaningful with another being? Those things are weaknesses. Are they? Taeyang gestured to Vrath. Has Vrath become a weaker warrior since he started eating these meals? Has his combat efficiency decreased? His reflexes slowed? Thresh looked at Vrath. Answer, warrior. No, High Commander, Vrath said. If anything, I am more focused. Less angry. I still train. Still maintain all protocols. But I am no longer always tense. Always alone. The meals give me something to look forward to beyond duty. Thresh was silent for a long moment. Then he reached for another piece of galbi. This is very concerning, he said quietly. Taeyang felt his heart hammering in his chest. Concerning could mean many things. Concerning could mean Thresh was about to execute his original plan. He forced himself to remain calm, to meet the High Commander's pale eyes without flinching. Concerning how, Commander? Taeyang asked quietly. Thresh ate the piece of galbi slowly, chewing with the same focused attention he had given every dish. When he swallowed, he looked at his claws as if seeing them for the first time. I have lived for 300 cycles. I have conquered 17 worlds. I have defeated every challenger who has faced me. I am a perfect example of what a Krell should be. Efficient, dominant, without weakness. He paused, and something flickered across his scarred face. And in 300 cycles I have never experienced anything like this food. Never knew such experiences existed. If I have lived for 3 centuries as a perfect Krell, and missed something this significant, what else have I missed? The question hung in the air. Vrath's eyes widened slightly. Taeyang barely dared to breathe. High Commander, Vrath said carefully, I have wondered the same thing. Before these meals, I believed I understood what it meant to be Krell. Strength, combat, hierarchy. But now I see that perhaps being Krell is not complete. Perhaps we have built our entire culture on only one aspect of existence. Thresh turned his pale gaze on Vrath. You speak of revolution, young warrior. You suggest our entire way of life is flawed. Not flawed, Taeyang interjected quickly. Just incomplete. Your warrior culture is remarkable. Your strength and discipline are unmatched in the galaxy, but strength does not have to exclude connection. Discipline does not have to mean isolation. He gestured to the table. This meal required discipline, patience, skill, but it also created a shared experience. A moment where 3 beings from different worlds sat together as equals. Equals. Thresh repeated the word slowly. He looked around the small quarters again, his gaze lingering on the cooking unit, the carefully stored spices, the worn but clean utensils. You prepare these meals alone? Every evening? Usually, Taeyang said, though lately Vrath has been helping. Learning the processes, Thresh's eyes sharpened. You have been teaching him to cook? He has been learning, yes. Show me, Thresh commanded suddenly. He stood, his massive frame unfolding. I wished to see this process. Taeyang blinked in surprise but quickly stood as well. You want to see how the food is prepared? No, Thresh said, and there was something new in his voice. Something that might have been curiosity. I wish to attempt it myself. If this activity has value, I will understand it better by doing than by observing. Vrath stood as well, looking uncertain. This was unprecedented. A high commander of the Krell Dominion asking to learn food preparation from a human. It defied every protocol, every tradition. It was either the beginning of something extraordinary or the prelude to their execution. Taeyang decided to treat it as genuine. Okay, what would you like to prepare? Thresh thought for a moment. Something simple. For a first attempt. Then we will make more bulgogi, Taeyang said. He moved to his small food storage and pulled out protein, marinade ingredients, and his precious gochujang. The process teaches patience and attention to detail. Warrior qualities applied to cooking. He laid out the ingredients and explained each one. The gochujang was fermented pepper paste aged for months. The sesame oil added richness. The garlic provided sharpness. The sugar balanced the heat. Each ingredient had a purpose, a role to play in the final result. Thresh listened with the same intense focus he probably applied to battle tactics. When Taeyang demonstrated slicing the meat thinly against the grain, Thresh took the knife and replicated the motion with surprising precision. His claws, designed for tearing prey, adapted to the delicate work. Why this angle? Thresh asked as he cut. Cutting against the grain makes the meat more tender. The muscle fibers are shorter, easier to chew. It is a small detail, but small details create the difference between average food and excellent food. Thresh nodded slowly. Like tactics, small positioning changes create victory. Exactly like that, Taeyang agreed. He showed Thresh how to mix the marinade, explaining the ratios. Too much gochujang overwhelmed the other flavors. Too little made the dish bland. Balance was everything. The High Commander's large claws made mixing difficult, but he approached the challenge with determined patience. Taeyang noticed Vrath watching intently, a strange expression on his face. Pride, maybe, or hope. When the marinade was ready, Thresh carefully placed the meat strips into it, coating each piece evenly. His movements were surprisingly gentle for a being who could kill with those same claws. Now it must rest, Taeyang explained. The flavors need time to penetrate the meat. This is the part that tests patience. You cannot rush it. You must wait. How long? Thresh asked. At least 1 hour. Longer is better. Thresh settled back onto the floor cushion, his eyes fixed on the container of marinating meat. Taeyang and Vrath sat as well. For several minutes, nobody spoke. Finally, Thresh broke the silence. Vrath, what do you do during this waiting period? We talk, Vrath said. Taeyang tells me about Earth, his family, his traditions. I tell him about Krell hunts, training, our history. We share stories, Thresh said quietly. When did you last share stories, young warrior? Never, High Commander. Krell do not share stories. We report, we brief, we command. But we do not sit together and simply talk about our experiences. Thresh was quiet for a long moment. Then he spoke, his deep voice softer than Taeyang had heard it. I remember my first hunt. I was 12 cycles old, small for a Krell. The others in my training group mocked me, said I would fail. The target was a razorback beast, twice my size with tusks that could tear through steel. Taeyang realized he was hearing something rare. A Krell sharing not a report or tactical analysis, but a memory, a story. I tracked it for 3 days, Thresh continued, studied its patterns, learned its territory. When I finally attacked, I did not use strength. I used patience and precision. I struck at the exact moment when the beast was vulnerable, brought it down with a single blow to the spine. His claws flexed unconsciously. I proved that being small did not mean being weak. That intelligence could overcome raw power. That is an excellent story, Taeyang said. Did anyone tell you that at the time? No, I ate the kill alone. Returned to the training center. Received my next assignment. That was all. But you remember it, Taeyang pointed out. After almost 300 cycles, you still remember that hunt. Because it meant something to you. That meaning deserved to be shared. Thresh looked at him with those pale eyes. Perhaps you are correct. They talked while the meat marinated. Vrath shared a story about his first combat mission, a border dispute that escalated into violence. Taeyang talked about his grandmother's kitchen, the way she had taught him to cook not just with recipes but with love and attention. Thresh shared fragments of 3 centuries of experience, battles and victories that had shaped him. When the hour had passed, Taeyang guided Thresh through grilling the meat. The High Commander's first attempts were too aggressive, burning the edges. But he adapted quickly, learning to control the heat, to watch for the exact moment when the meat was perfect. The smell filled the quarters. Sweet, spicy, savory. Thresh removed the meat from the grill and arranged it on a plate with the same careful attention he had given every step of the process. Then he sat back and looked at what he had created. I made this, he said, and there was wonder in his voice. You did, Taeyang confirmed, and now you understand what it means to create something not for efficiency but for meaning. Thresh picked up a piece of his own cooking with his claws. He placed it in his mouth and chewed slowly. His eyes closed. When they opened again, they were different. Not softer exactly, but less cold, less empty. This is acceptable, Bulgogi, Vrath observed, for a first attempt. It is more than acceptable, Thresh said quietly. It is mine. I created it. For 300 cycles I have only destroyed or conquered. This is the first time I have made something that has no purpose except to be enjoyed. He set down the meat and looked at both Taeyang and Vrath. I came here to execute orders, to eliminate a corrupting influence and restore proper Krell discipline. But I see now that what is happening here is not corruption, it is evolution. Taeyang felt hope flare in his chest but remained cautious. Evolution, Commander? The Krell Dominion is the strongest warrior culture in the galaxy, Thresh said. We have conquered because we are efficient, focused, and without sentiment. But we are also alone, isolated, feared but never befriended, respected but never loved. He gestured to the food. What if we could be both? Warriors and creators? Strong and connected? What if we added this dimension to our culture without losing our strength? That would be unprecedented, Vrath said carefully. Yes, Thresh agreed. It would be revolutionary, dangerous. Many in Krell Command would oppose it. He paused, then looked directly at Taeyang. But perhaps it is time for the Krell to learn something new, to become more complete. Taeyang felt tears prick his eyes but blinked them back. I would be honored to teach any Krell who wishes to learn, Commander. Thresh stood slowly, rising to his full impressive height. For a moment, Taeyang thought he had misread everything, that the execution was coming after all. But then Thresh did something no one expected. He bowed, not a slight nod of acknowledgement, but a full Krell bow, head lowered, claws spread. a gesture of deepest respect that signified one warrior acknowledging another as superior in a specific domain. You have taught me something beyond combat, human Taeyang. You have shown me that my culture, mighty as it is, was incomplete. For this wisdom, I honor you. Vrath's mouth fell open in shock. Taeyang stood frozen, unsure how to respond. Finally, he bowed in return, the way his grandmother had taught him to honor elders and teachers. When they straightened, Thresh's expression had changed. There was still predatory power there, still the hardness of a warrior, but also something new. Warmth, perhaps, or possibility. I will return to Krell Command, Thresh said. I will report that the warrior Vrath has discovered a new form of discipline training that enhances focus and mental clarity. I will recommend that selected Krell warriors be assigned to study human food preparation as a supplementary skill. It will be controversial, but I have enough authority to make it policy. Just like that? Vrath sounded amazed. You will change Krell culture based on one meal? Not one meal, Thresh corrected. One experience that revealed a truth I had been blind to for 3 centuries. Change must begin somewhere. Why not here? Why not now? He looked at the cooking unit, the grill, the carefully stored spices. I will need recipes, instructions, guidance for those who will study this discipline. I can provide all of that, Taeyang said quickly. And, Commander, if I may suggest, perhaps some Krell could be assigned to human stations as cultural liaisons, to learn not just cooking but all aspects of human tradition. In exchange, humans could learn from Krell warrior culture. Thresh considered this. An exchange program, yes, that has strategic value. Understanding the humans will help the Krell in future negotiations and alliances. He paused, then added more quietly, and perhaps it will help us become less alone. They talked for another hour, planning the details. Thresh asked dozens of questions about recipes, ingredients, techniques. He took notes on a datapad with surprising diligence. When he finally prepared to leave, he paused at the door. Human Taeyang, warrior Vrath. What happened in this room tonight will echo through Krell history. Future generations may curse us for weakening warrior culture, or they may thank us for completing it. Either way, we have begun something that cannot be undone. I hope they thank us, Taeyang said. Thresh's mouth curved in what might have been a smile. As do I. He left, his heavy footsteps fading down the corridor. Vrath and Taeyang sat in stunned silence for several minutes. Did that actually happen? Vrath finally asked. I think so, Taeyang said. He looked at the plate of bulgogi Thresh had made, still sitting on the table. We just changed galactic history with marinated meat. Vrath's shoulders shook. At first, Taeyang thought he was angry. Then he realized the Krell warrior was laughing. Deep, rumbling laughter that sounded rusty from disuse. My people will think I am insane, Vrath said between laughs. Revolutionizing Krell culture with spicy pork. Beef, Taeyang corrected automatically, then started laughing too. The absurdity of it all hit him. He had faced down a 300-cycle-old warrior commander, armed with nothing but gochujang and patience. 6 months later, Taeyang stood in his quarters preparing dinner. But this time he was not alone. Vrath worked at the second cooking unit they had installed, grilling vegetables. 3 other Krell warriors, newly assigned to Epsilon 7 as cultural liaison trainees, watched intently and asked questions. From across the station came the smell of cooking food, not just from his quarters but from a dozen others. Humans teaching Krell. Krell teaching humans their own traditions in return. Species that had once maintained careful distance now shared meals, stories, and laughter. Commander Park had expanded the program. Epsilon 7 had become a pilot station for cross-cultural exchange. Other stations were requesting similar programs. The Krell Dominion had officially recognized food preparation as a supplementary warrior discipline. Thresh visited monthly, each time bringing new Krell warriors to train and taking recipes back to command. He had started a personal collection of earth spices and had reportedly scandalized a military briefing by serving kimchi stew during a strategy session. Taeyang's grandmother would have loved this. She had always said that food could change the world, that sharing a meal was sharing a piece of your soul, that even the strongest walls could be breached with the right seasoning and patience. As he watched Vrath carefully teaching a young Krell warrior how to properly mix marinade, Taeyang smiled. The galaxy's strongest predators had learned to do more than hunt and fight. They had learned to create, to share, to connect, all because one curious warrior had smelled home cooking and wanted to know what it meant. And somewhere, in the vast darkness of space, new friendships formed over shared meals. Predator and prey, warrior and cook, sitting together and learning that strength came in many forms. The most powerful form, perhaps, was the strength to be vulnerable enough to change. The energy barrier flickered and died. 4 guards stepped into the cell. They wore full combat armor and carried shock batons that crackled with blue electricity. Daeho recognized the one in front. He had been there when they threw Daeho into the cell. "Disappointing," the lead guard said. His voice was harsh through his helmet speakers. "We expected blood. We expected a corpse. Instead, we find you two talking like old friends." Velrax said nothing. He stood perfectly still, a statue of coiled violence. Daeho could see the Karvathi's muscles tensing beneath his scales, preparing for action. "Commander Hyunwoo is very displeased," another guard said. "He paid good credits to watch the human die. But you have robbed him of his entertainment, Karvathi. Perhaps the human is already dead inside," the third guard suggested. "Perhaps we should check." He moved toward Daeho, baton raised. Daeho backed up a step, hands coming up in a defensive posture. His ribs were healing but still weak. A direct hit with that baton would break them again, or worse. The guard lunged forward, swinging the baton at Daeho's head. Daeho ducked under the swing, pain flaring through his chest from the sudden movement. The baton passed over him, crackling with energy. He kept moving, trying to circle away from the wall, to keep space between himself and the guard. Then Velrax moved. It was so fast Daeho almost missed it. One moment the Karvathi was standing still, the next he was between Daeho and the guard. His hand shot out and caught the guard's wrist, stopping the baton mid-swing. "No," Velrax growled. The other 3 guards reacted instantly. One jabbed his baton into Velrax's side. Electricity arced across the Karvathi's body. Velrax roared in pain but did not let go of the first guard's wrist. His grip tightened, and there was a crack as bones broke. The guard screamed, "Subdue the Karvathi!" the lead guard shouted. 2 of them rushed forward, batons raised. Daeho saw the guard he had been fighting stumble back, clutching his broken wrist. The shock baton fell from his hand, clattering on the floor. Without thinking, Daeho lunged for it. His ribs screamed in protest, but adrenaline drowned out the pain. His fingers closed around the weapon. The lead guard saw him grab the baton. He turned away from Velrax, eyes locked on Daeho. "You dare?" He charged at Daeho, his own baton raised high. Daeho did not have time to think. His father's training took over, lessons drilled into him since childhood. When a larger opponent charges, you do not meet force with force. You use their momentum against them. Daeho waited until the guard was almost on him, then sidestepped at the last instant. He swung the baton low, striking the back of the guard's knee. The guard's leg buckled. He fell forward, crashing into the wall with a metallic clang. Before he could recover, Daeho brought the baton down on the back of his helmet. Once. Twice. The third strike shorted out the helmet systems and the guard went limp. Daeho spun around, breathing hard. His vision blurred at the edges, but he forced himself to focus. Velrax was fighting the other 2 guards. Even wounded, even shocked by the batons, the Karvathi was a storm of violence. His claws raked across armor, leaving deep gouges. His tail whipped out, striking one guard in the head and sending him sprawling. But there were 2 of them, and they were coordinating their attacks. One would strike, while the other defended. They were wearing Velrax down, making him bleed from a dozen small cuts where their batons had connected. Daeho ran forward, ignoring the pain in his chest. He swung his baton at the nearest guard, hitting him in the side. The guard grunted and turned to face this new threat. That moment of distraction was all Velrax needed. His claws found the gap between the guard's helmet and chest plate. The guard went down. The last guard standing looked at his 3 fallen comrades. His hand moved to the communication device on his belt. Velrax and Daeho moved at the same time. Velrax tackled him from one side while Daeho grabbed his arm from the other. They dragged him down together. The guard fought, but he was 1 against 2. Velrax's fist, powered by muscle and fury, crashed into the guard's helmet. The guard stopped moving. Silence filled the cell. Deho and Velrak stood there, breathing hard, staring at each other over the unconscious bodies. Blood dripped from Velrax's wounds. Deho's ribs felt like they were on fire again. "You fought beside me," Velrak said. His voice was filled with something like wonder. "You protected me." "You protected me first," Deho replied. "I just returned the favor." Velrax looked down at the guards, then back at Deho. His bioluminescent marks were pulsing rapidly, brighter than Deho had ever seen them. "We fought together. As packkin." "Yes." Deho nodded, then winced as the movement pulled at his ribs. "Yes, we did." An alarm began to wail. Red lights flashed in the corridor outside. More footsteps echoed, these ones running. Many of them. "They will send reinforcements," Velrak said. "Many guards, we cannot fight them all." Deho looked at the cell's open door, then at the guards on the floor. One of them was groaning, starting to regain consciousness. The guard whose wrist Velrax had broken was curled on his side, whimpering. "We need to move them," Deho said. "What?" Velrax looked confused. "Why? They attacked us. Let them suffer." "Because more guards are coming. When they see their people lying in the corridor, they will come in shooting to kill. But if we move them to the corner, if we show we are not trying to escape," Deho met Velrax's eyes. "It might buy us time, it might keep us alive." "You care about keeping them alive? After they tried to kill you?" "I care about surviving," Deho said. "And right now, showing mercy might be the smartest move." Velrak stared at him for a long moment. Then slowly he nodded. "Your species thinks in strange ways, but you have not been wrong yet." Together they dragged the 4 unconscious guards to the corner of the cell, away from the door. Deho checked each one. All were alive, just knocked out. The one with the broken wrist needed medical attention, but he would survive. Velrax watched as Deho tore strips from the guards' uniforms and used them to bandage the worst injuries. "You heal those who tried to hurt you?" "I keep them from dying," Deho corrected. "There is a difference. If they die, we become murderers. The coalition will execute us. If they live, we can claim self-defense." "More human thinking," Velrak said. But he helped, using his claws to cut the fabric into strips. When they finished, both of them were exhausted. Deho's hands were shaking. Velrax's wounds had stopped bleeding, but he moved more slowly now. They walked back to their sleeping platforms and sat down, their backs against the wall. The footsteps in the corridor grew louder. Many boots, moving in formation. Military precision. Deho could hear commands being shouted, the whine of weapons charging. "They will come in ready to kill us," Velrak said quietly. "Probably," Deho agreed. "We could fight. We would lose." "Yes." Velrax's marks pulsed slowly. "But we would die as warriors." Deho thought about that. He thought about his family back on Earth, about the colony he had tried to protect. He thought about never seeing them again. The thought hurt more than his broken ribs. "I do not want to die today," Deho said. "Not here, not like this." "Neither do I," Velrax admitted, "but I see no other path." Then we wait. We show no aggression. We put down the batons. Deho tossed his captured weapon toward the door. After a moment, Velrax did the same. We let them see the guards are alive. We cooperate.